Hello friends, here we will say notes of judicial inductive criticism. Introduction. Judicial inductive criticism refers to a method of legal analysis where judges, instead of strictly adhering to precedent, make decision based on a broader understanding of the law and its application, drawing conclusion from specific cases to establish broader legal principles. Critics have differed as to the proper function of criticism, whether it should undertake to judge or stop short at interpretation, though it may be admitted that criticism at some stage must pass beyond mere exposition and attempt evaluation. A later day school of critics have studiously adjured the function of a judge and have merely confined themselves to describing what is rather than opinioning what ought to be. Critics of an earlier day, schooled in the principles of classic art and taking Aristotle and Horace as their preceptors, proceeded to judge contemporary works of art by the rules formulated by the venerable ancient masters. The practice of Ben Jonson and Edison and Dr. Johnson illustrates this position of the critic as judge. Edison set himself to finding the beauties essential to an epic poem in Paradise Lost in the light of the rule of epic poetry which Aristotle had laid down and which we derive by an examination of the classics ourselves. Judged by Aristotelian rules, the subject of Paradise Lost is found wanting. It does not end happily as Aristotle says the story of an epic poem should. However, Edison implies by a self satisfying admission that Aristotle's rules do not cover all the kind of epics. If we had studied an epic like the Aeneid, which was written hundreds of years after his death, he would have enlarged his rules. This, by the way, established the principle of development in literature, which is that what held good for the ancient need no longer be so for us. Dryden put it succinctly when he said, what pleased the Greeks would not satisfy an English audience. That had Aristotle read Shakespeare, he would have thought ourselves otherwise. Dr. Johnson, whose taste had been formed by the neoclassical literature of his own days, sometimes erred gravely in his judgment of literature of a different kind. He was partially blinded by his classical bias to the greatness of Milton and the poetic talent of Gray and Collins. These aberrations of the judicial critic expose the vulnerability of judicial criticism. This is because it takes the laws of art to have been fixed by the ancient masters, and that these laws should at all times be respected and obeyed. Whatever departs from them must be flayed and hence condemned. Now, this view of rules and principles, of standards of excellence and criteria of judgment as a master of unvarying dictates, commanding absolute and universal sway, essentially misses, for one thing, the vital principle of growth in literature, and for another, the principle of vulnerable of taste and literary values. Later critics, particularly those of the 19th century, working under the liberating spirit of Romanticism, saw the fallacy of the judicial critic, who falsely assumed that the so called laws of art are like the laws of morality or of an autocratic state made once for all by the literary monarchs of old and demanding unflinching audience from later generations, actuated by the contemporary spirit of historicism and by the investigating spirit of science. These critics adopted a neutral posture. They said, it is not for us to judge, our business is to interpret the writer and his works of whatever kind they are. We do not take sides. Here, the critics who are there, they interpret the work of writer rather than judging. We pronounce nothing good or bad, superior or inferior, praise or blame does not belong to our job. We do not classify poets or artists according to an order of merit. Merit, absolute or relative, is not our concern. It is not even relevant. It is outside the critic's purview. We undertake to examine literature or literary works in a pure spirit of investigation. We seek to describe what is and do not presume to lay down what ought to be. We try to discover the principles on which the poet's work is built and formulate the result of our findings in the form of generalized statements. The laws we speak are of the individual artist's own making. Here, poet want to say it is not the work to judge somebody's work good or bad, he is superior or inferior. It is just a pure evaluation process, just judging or checking the work of literature. Aristotelian laws of drama. It would be inept on the part of the critic to apply the Aristotelian laws of dramatic art to the dramatic compositions of Shakespeare. In the spirit of geological scientist who does not hold up one type of rock formation as good or bad, beside another we seek to describe works of literary art as we find them. We do not let our individual taste interfere with our task. Let's we may be tempted to the judge something as good or bad according to our taste. Neither do we concern ourselves with literary values. So we make no individuals comparisons, in fact, no value judgment at all. This kind of criticism, which purports to take each author on his own terms and takes no frame to reference except that provided by each individual author or work, is called the inductive type. It found its best exponent in the English critic R.G. Moulton, and he gave a classic annunciation to this brand of purely investigative, interpretative kind of literary criticism. In his preface to Shakespeare as a dramatic artist, the points of difference between the two types may be indicated thus. First one, that while the older judicial method concerned itself with questions of merit, absolute or relative, the new inductive method approaches literary works in a neutral spirit of pure investigation. While it may not differ of kind, it recognizes no difference in degree. Secondly, while the older school believed that so-called laws of literature are permanent and fixed, absolute, and that literary works can be tested by these rules and these alone, and their merit judged by preference to standardize set by the ancient, the new schools of inductive critics asserted the independence of each artist and unique character of each literary work. Here it give permission to each and everybody